differentiating the past from history is obviously an intellectual thing to do, but it's also a very personal thing to do, in the sense that every historian, I suspect, distinguishes the past from history differentially. For me, the past is the time before now, as it is, I suppose, for everybody, but history is the narrative or narratives that we create about the past. And because we have no engagement with the reality of the past, all we have is the history, which means we're only engaging with a narrative substitute for the past. Now, historians conventionally, traditionally, try to mate the past with the history so that we can legitimately talk about the history and the past, and they mean the same thing. Unfortunately, the past being the past and effectively inaccessible means all we've got are the narratives that we substitute for the past. So when we talk about history, we ought to really realize, understand that we are talking about history. We are not talking about the nature of the past. We're talking about history. And I think that's when, by not acknowledging that we lose a great deal of traction on the nature of what we're doing as historians. So I suppose I would always start with the history. Other historians would start with the past in the sources and so on. I've done that in the past myself. But essentially, I'm now interested in the nature of how we turn the past into history. And so we have to start with the history, as much as we might wish to engage with the past. In terms of the life of the journal Rethinking History, the Journal of Theory and Practice, founded 20 years ago, at the height of the so-called postmodern, how can I put it, the postmodern. Subsequently, historians have struggled, in my view, to rationalize the process and frankly understand, in a broader sense, the process of turning the past into history. I mean, I don't teach as such these days, but when I did, I used a simple example to explain to students what I mean by the past and history and the difference. And I used to, students like this, a bit of help and lectures and so on. I'd hold my hands up like that and I'd say, this is the past, this is history. And Cliff's point about the distinction or similarity or the nature of the connection between the past and history, I would hold up my hands. And I'd say, most people, most historians would say that the object is to make them fit, like your hands do, like that. Problem is, of course, that in the nature of things, that is not possible, because if you think about it, they don't fit like that unless you believe that they have to exist in a certain relationship. But I don't. I mean, that, if you like, is conventional, the past is history, history is the past. This is a kind of postmodern approach where we say, hang on, the past and history are not the same thing. The past is the time before now, history are these narratives that we create about it. And so all we've got is history. History is a narrative substitute for the past. Now, this isn't disabling. It doesn't mean to say we have to abandon history. In fact, it means we've got to work with history and understand the nature of history in its engagement with the past. And I think this is what makes history most important, when we understand its ontological nature in relationship to the past. That it's a created narrative. If we're thinking, I don't mean invented, we still have the data, the empirical dimension to it, we still draw inferences, we're looking for meanings. Nothing in that sense has changed, except that we now understand that all we've got as historians are our powers of narrative making. And that's very important to me. It's the creation of history, not the kind of disambiguation of the past or lying about the past or anything very silly like that. And following on from the distinction that I've just made, virtually everything I've ever written is built on that premise of how we connect history to the past. And well, at the moment, I've written about that in a number of texts over the years, but at the moment I'm writing a book which I hope will be aimed at not just the academic world, but also perhaps the general reader. And it's the notion that, based upon what I just said, that we need to distinguish the past from history. And therefore we need to look at how we create our histories. And this is where, of course, we come into the sphere of how the past, in effect, as a historical past, changes with the form. And this is why we need to address, in my view, we need to address the content of the form. That's not my thought. This is a thought from the philosopher of history Hayden White. And he spent a great deal of time talking about the content of the form. In other words, in order to engage with the past, we can only do it through that narrative substitute we call a history. And so it's very important that we understand the authorial nature of history, and we never confuse history with the past, because we can't engage with the past, but we do engage with its representations, which can be textual, it can be a reenactment, it can be stage drama, it can be a lecture, a seminar, and so on and so forth. But that's the only connection we've really got with the past. And I say really got, that is it. It's our immediate impression of the past through its substitution by another form. And once we get into, I think, that notion, we can understand much better the value of history, which I value very highly. The nature of our engagement with the past is the trick, understanding that. That's important. But we should never confuse the past with history.